What's up, everybody? Kaz Danazan here with Crash Productions. Today, we are doing something a little bit differently than all the other Atari Dev Space videos that we have done before. Today, we are joined by the amazing, the talented, the beautiful Megan McDuffie. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Can't complain. I'm glad to have you. For those who have maybe never heard of you before, why don't you give us an introduction on who you are and what you do, and give us a little bit of information about you?
Sure. I'm also very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yep, as he said, my name's Megan. I am primarily a music producer and composer for video games, film, as well as a recording artist.
And you've been doing music for how long?
Well, are we talking professionally or just, as like a hobby or something I enjoy? Because if it's the latter, my whole life.
All right, so let's rephrase that question. Tell us a little bit about your inspirations, what got you into music, and how you ended up to where you are now.
Sure, that is a very long journey, but I will try to condense it for you.
Okay.
Um, as I briefly mentioned, yeah, I've done music in one form or another my whole life. There was never really a question of what I was going to do once I became an adult. It was always just like, yep, music, that's what I do all the time, 100%. Um, yeah, so as a kid, I was doing voice lessons, piano lessons, choir, show choir, which was like Glee Club, musical theater stuff. That carried all the way, through high school. Uh, in college, I studied film scoring and electronic music production, and then a little bit later on for graduate stuff, I did orchestration specifically because I really wanted to write big symphonies and score films with 80-piece orchestras. And some of my inspirations, that's tricky. I listen to a little bit of everything.
Okay.
Uh, trying to think of like some major turning points that got me here, but that's tricky. I mean, I'm a big fan of film scores in general. 80s and 90s music is kind of what I grew up with, so those genres and that sort of era holds a special place in my heart. I feel like it probably comes through a little bit in my work too. And yeah, just after college was just, kind of pounding the pavement, so to speak, trying to see what was going to stick and ended up in video games.
It's interesting that you say that you have some inspirations from like 90s music and orchestral and stuff like that, because I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, and this is going just a little bit off topic for a minute. I'm a big fan of like score numbers, like for example, Requiem for a Dream. Clint Mansell, he is an amazing, amazing artist, right? And then there's of course like
Yeah, very good.
the theme for Saw, and then the theme for 28 Days Later. Like those type of themes and those type of like musical composures really sell it home for me. It makes me feel something whenever I'm watching it and it's playing out to make that one scene the most dramatic. And if I could ever make music,
Hmm.
it'd definitely be something like that that like ups the anxiety and kind of gets you invested into whatever it is that it's attached to. Which
Totally.
leads me into my next question. Now, you have a
Sure.
contract with Atari, and you are working on the musical compositions of the Atari Recharge series. Can you tell us a little bit about that right now? Oh,
Yeah, I just recently wrapped the eighth. Was it the eighth? Yeah, the eighth recharged title. So I've been kind of chipping away at all these recharged titles as they're getting developed. It's been really fun. It's been really great. Um, they all kind of have a different flavor and a different approach, but at the same time, I feel like it's also pretty cohesive. So that's been a kind of a fun challenge, right? To keep the cohesion between all of the titles
right.
and subsequently the music, but also give them each a unique flavor as well.
Currently, right now, my favorite Recharge title is Missile Command Recharged and Centipede
Nice.
Recharged. Those two, for some reason, and it's not just the games. Like I wasn't really big on Centipede growing up, but I've played it. But Missile Command, I played the original Recharge before they decided to give it a whole new flavor, and
Mhm.
the musical composers for both of those games, for some reason, resonates with me more than any of the others. Um, can you walk us through the process of making the music for these games? Like, if you had to pick one of the games that are currently available right now, which is your favorite, and what led into the inspiration for that music?
Yeah. Oh, it's so hard to pick a favorite because I'm kind of I have so much fun doing every single one of them. But a little bit about process. I'd say let's just take Centipede for example, since you just mentioned it.
Okay.
That was the first Recharge title that I worked on, and they kind of sort of gave me a rough idea about what they were looking for, but it was it was mostly just like, we trust you, here's the old beeps and boops. I don't know if that makes any difference, but here you go. Have fun listening to that. And yeah, they just sort of wanted some, not uplifting, what's the word? Like energetic, that's the word. They wanted some energetic music to go along with this sort of neon visual that they were creating. And obviously wanted to incorporate things that kept your heart racing, kept you going, kept you wanting to, do better and better. And I wanted to sneak in some things that might feel insectoid, if that makes sense. So things using synths that sound very buggy or like creepy crawly and wiggly. So I feel like all of the Recharge titles that have some sort of bug theme, not so much Yars, but definitely Centipede and Black Widow, I tried to utilize things that sonically reminded me of insects. I don't know if that comes across, but
I think I
I
kind
tried
of
to do that.
I think I kind of get what you're saying, but so Atari recently announced recently announced the Caverns of Mars Recharged. The music that is going to be featured in that game, are you available to talk about that right now, or do we have to wait for like when it releases before we can talk about that video game? Because they dropped the trailer yesterday.
Yeah, I think I can talk about it since it's officially out in the open now. Yeah, the music for that one was actually a little bit more challenging because they wanted a very specific 90s drum and bass sound,
Mhm.
uh, which I've, always enjoyed listening to, but I haven't produced a lot of. So that was super fun to kind of get to work with some older sounding vinyl samples and break beats, which I've always enjoyed, but like I said, I haven't produced much of that. So that was super fun.
So we're gonna. I mentioned that we're gonna do something a little bit differently for this interview, and moving forward with it, I want to ask you a few questions that were sent in to me from people who watch the series and are avid members of the VCS community. Um, and just looking at my list here real quick, so we happen to have two people who have asked a variety of questions, and I'm gonna let you pick the first one that we read from. We have Ryan Collins, and then we have
Okay,
John Bernard. What do you want to hear from first?
let's go with Ryan.
Let's go with Ryan. All right.
Yeah.
So, what kind of material does she receive to help guide her creative process to harmonize with the projects at hand? If the initial submitted sample of a song for a project is rejected, how does it reshape her original feelings of how she felt the score should go?
Hmm. Two very good questions. I
Hmm.
will address the first one first. For the Recharge series in general, I mean, it kind of differs from project to project or between studios. But for the Atari stuff, they basically give me work in progress artwork, screenshots of gameplay, usually rough gameplay, but not always. So I have a visual at least of some type to work from. And they also kind of give me a little backstory about the older version of the game and kind of what they were trying to achieve with the new recharged version of it. And then they will give me music inspiration. So they'll usually send like 2 to 4 tracks that they kind of like the feel of, or at least instrumentation wise. And they say, okay, go from there. So that's normally what I get. And then to address the second part of that, I've been super fortunate enough in that the team has quite literally been editless. Like I'll send in the track and they're like, great, next one. And I haven't had any revision requests, save for one. The first track that I did for Caverns of Mars, they were like, it's a little too retro sounding.
Okay.
Like the samples were too 90s, too on the nose, a little less polished sounding because of that. So, when they said drum and bass, I thought, okay, let's like go for it. I'm gonna get some like old ass sounding sample packs that were legitimately from the 90s and work with that. But that was a little too on the nose, I think, for the more polished visual that they were going for. So in that instance, that's that I got that feedback on the first iteration and then quickly turned it around, just tightening it up and removing some of the stuff that may have sounded kitschy, if that makes sense.
So before we move on to the next question, I want to ask you real quick, is my signal coming in all right? Because there's a little bit of lag and I have to keep moving my hotspot over here.
Okay, yeah, so the audio is fine, but sometimes you get a little glitched out.
Okay. I am going to do something real quick, so give me just one
Yeah,
second.
go for it.
All right, see if maybe that helps. I know my Wi-Fi antenna is at the top of my phone, so if I have it in my tripod and have it pointed skywards, maybe that will fix all my problems.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, because that makes sense, but probably doesn't make sense. All right, let's see here. So we had a few questions. Okay, gotcha. All right, so we have questions from Jean Bernard, and then we have questions from John Schaefer. Which one do you want to hear first?
I will choose Jean Bernard this time.
Jean Bernard. All right. So Jean has multiple questions, so we have plenty to talk about here. So we'll go ahead and start with the first
All
question.
right.
Um, what started your cooperation with Atari? Did they reach out first, or did you reach out to them?
Good question. They reached out to me after hearing my score for River City Girls back in 2019.
Nice. Speaking of which,
Yeah.
you guys, or you just released a music video for River City Girls 2, and I've seen the music video. And how has reception been for that so far?
Seems to great. We kind of built up a fan base for the first game, and so had the same people really hyped for the sequel. And I think that that really made a difference. I didn't realize just how hardcore the fan base was for the River City series that goes way back to Super Nintendo. I had heard of River City Ransom, but like I said, I didn't really know the depth of the fandom there. So when the first game came out, I mean, the hype was through the roof and I just kind of couldn't believe it. I still get people that message me to this day, what, 4 years later, that's like, I just finally played River City Girls and oh, holy shit, the soundtrack. So that always makes my day.
I think part of the biggest, one of the biggest factors for the success of the game is that it was also released during the time of a major nostalgia bubble too. And that's also where a lot of hype for other things, like for example, Atari and Intellivision, kind of came into play. So that was the best
Mm-hmm.
time to release that game and then tie it in with River City Ransom. So kudos on that, by the way.
Good
But
for Way Forward for figuring that out.
so let's move on to the next question here from Jean Bernard. It says, okay, it's worded a little differently here. What are her inspiration sources and what kind of synth or software does she use?
Well, as I mentioned before, inspiration kind of comes from all over the place. And for a game, I'm usually kind of given some sort of musical constraint to guide my inspiration. So, I'm fed the inspiration, I guess. And then as far as software goes, my digital audio workstation is Cubase. That's kind of where I live. And a few favorite synth plugins are Omnisphere 2, um, all the native instrument stuff, so things like Massive and Battery. What else? There's a really kind of obscure synth called Rob Papin's Predator, and that one has some really amazing retro sounds. I would say like
That's an
80s,
interesting
90s, and early 2000s.
that's a really interesting name. Say the
What
name
was
again.
that? So it's a guy called Rob Papin. That's his name, and the synth is called Predator.
Oh, okay. So it's not like a collective. It's not John. Wait, I I heard the name and I pronounced the name wrong. Point. Just disregard the question. We'll move on. I'm so sorry. Okay. Would you ever consider a collaboration between the legendary Jeff Minter, creator of Tempest?
Of course. I would be silly not to.
All right. Let's move on.
Pretty simple for that one.
Yeah, right. But it's a good question though, because I mean, Jeff, I mean, there's not enough that you can say about him. That you'd have to have a whole dedicated couple of hours to even talk about the games that he has his hands in. Actually, Ballistic Coffee Boy did a history of the other day. I know you did an interview with him too, so shout out to you, BCB.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so we now have one more, and that is John Schaefer, and he wants to know
All right.
what inspired you for the Asteroid soundtrack.
Hmm. Trying to remember, it's been a little while since I worked on that one. If they gave me any sort of musical inspiration to work from, like if they gave me any example tracks, I don't think they did. I think all I had was visuals and just sort of a rough idea. Obviously, I wanted it to sound spacey, so things that made me think intergalactic and galaxies and shoot, hurtling through the void, that kind of thing. Yeah, I just sort of went with the feeling that I got, and tried to create stuff that brought to mind hurtling through space.
All right, moving on to the last question from John Schaefer. I can't ask one of the questions he's asking, but the other question is, what was your favorite recharged track and why?
Ooh, that's so hard. I think, oh, that's really hard. I had a lot of fun on all of them, but I kind of have a tie. I would say just as a whole, the tracks that I did for Gravatar, and the tracks I did for Missile Command. I feel like they're both super different from one another, but they're both my favorite for different reasons. Gravatar, because it was completely different from any of the other Recharged games, music wise. Really ambient, really kind of cinematic, but subtle. In your face, pumping electronica, a little bit more soundscapey. So that was a really fun break from doing all of these crazy high energy songs. And then Missile Command was fun because I feel like I conjured up some really punchy bass lines for that one. So I'm a sucker for good bass.
So that is all of the questions that were asked in relation to you. Other questions that were asked, I unfortunately cannot pick up on because they are not related to the topic. So now the following question: what is in store for Megan McDuffie right now? What can people look out for?
Ooh, what can I talk about? So I'm always working on a million different things at once. Um, I'd say in the long term, be on the lookout for Streets of Rogue 2. Streets of Rogue was kind of an indie hit a couple years ago, I want to say. And he recently announced he's working on a sequel, and um, the production company, I want to say publisher, is Tiny Build, and they do a lot of fantastic games. So be on the lookout for Streets of Rogue 2. That should be super fun. I know there will be more Atari Recharged titles, so that will be happening, definitely.
Can you leak a few?
What else? What was that?
Can you leak a few of them?
Oh, I don't actually know them yet. I just know they are coming.
It was worth a try.
What else? I'm working on a few singles, potentially an album. I'll be flying to Canada in a couple months to shoot a really freaking awesome epic music video for one of these singles. So jacked about that. Yeah, lots of stuff.
Okay, so getting back into the interview, what? Bless you.
Sorry. Hi.
Hey, she said hello.
Oh, hi.
Okay, let's reset. Woosah. Okay. So for those who are currently watching right now, where can they find your music? Where can they buy your products? Where can they follow you?
Everywhere and anywhere, I will take it. Musically speaking, I would say Bandcamp and Spotify are kind of my preferred locations. Bandcamp's great, just for digital downloads, and then Spotify is also great because there are countless collaborations I've done that are definitely not sold on my Bandcamp. So if you want like everything I've ever worked on, it's like 7 to 10 hours of music. Spotify is the way to go. I'm also very active on Twitter and YouTube and Instagram. Just look for my name and I will pop up.
I was getting ready to end the interview, but I have two questions I want to ask real quick.
All right.
So, going back to River City Girls, you had worked on the soundtrack for that. And the soundtrack features a lot of impressive talents for music and such. What was it? Did you ever work directly with Nate Wants to Battle, or if so, what was it like working with him on the soundtrack?
Sorry to say, but I did not actually work directly with Nate for the first game. I didn't work with any of the musical guests. It was kind of like Way Forward had the idea of who they wanted to do what, and
Mhm.
then everybody sort of worked separately on their own pieces, and then I sort of assembled the soundtrack at the very end once everyone had their stuff done. So no actual process there. Same with the, well, not quite the same with the sequel. That was slightly different.
Now,
But yeah, I didn't get to.
I will tell you, I actually in my music playlist, I have a few tracks from River City Girls, and I have some of the recharge titles also in my music playlist. But I have some other songs that you've done, whether they be covers or collaborations with another artist by the name of, I think his name is Alex.
Mhm.
There's like a lot of like retro 80s synthwave, but they also add that um kind of like that it's, I don't want to say flair, but I'm going to say flair. It's kind of like a it lures you in kind of flair. I don't know what word that would be, but what are some other artists that you have essentially worked with? Like I said, we've mentioned Alex. Obviously, you haven't really worked in coherency with Nate Wants to Battle, or face to face with Nate Wants to Battle. But who have you worked with?
I have worked with Clayton, also known as Cell Dweller, Circle of Dust, and Scandroid. He's got like a bunch of different
Oh
monikers.
my God, Cell Dweller emo phase is coming out. No,
Right? Yeah.
dude, James Farr, creator of Zombie DOA, he runs Doomwell as well. And I was a huge fan of his, and I got into Cell Dweller from his Flash animation in like 2003. So like that is do you know James Farr at all?
Uh, are you speaking of animator James Farr?
Yes. He
Yeah,
created, you act like you know him or you've worked with him.
I know him. We have had many a chat. I've never met him in person, but yeah, we know each
Dude,
other.
okay, sorry, I'm deviating a little bit, but I'm like a huge fanboy of James Farr.
He's
I
great.
I found his zombie series um on Newgrounds when I was very young, and every I would always wait for the next episode. And when it ended with that cliffhanger, and then there was the 5 issue run from Devil's Deuce Publishing, and then of course he brought it back, and then the second season just kind of left with a cliffhanger, and then there was an announcement of a possible movie, and now I'm just like, it needs a proper conclusion. Like, okay, I shouldn't do this, but tell him I'm a fan, and thank you for all the memories.
Yeah, I totally will. He and I have been meaning to collaborate for a very long time, but we're both so busy that it just like kind of hasn't happened yet. One of these days, though, we're gonna do it.
Oh my God. I have his Doomwell album also in my playlist. Like the whole album is there. But anyway, okay. Not about James. No offense, James. It's all about Megan today. Okay. So, all right. So you've worked with all these amazing artists. Who would you have to say if you had no choice but to pick and your life was on the line to pick someone, who would you pick? I'm putting you on the spot.
That's so hard because what exactly is the criteria? Is this like my favorite people to hang out with, or is this my favorite
What is your
musically
favorite
speaking, or
what is your favorite collaboration project? You don't have to answer. You can say no comment.
I
I'm just
have I have a tie. I have a tie again. Recently I did a very dark, kind of sultry reimagining of a Banjo Kazooie track, and I collaborated with Richard E.B. He did the guitar work on it, and we did a little music video shot in his garage that came out a couple months ago, I think in October, and that was great. Richard is extremely talented. You can hear him on the River City Girls soundtrack, both of them. He's the guitarist, he's the metalhead, he's shredding. Great guy. And then the tie is with a track I dropped with Alex called Villain. It's very sinister. I actually get to do some screaming, which is rare for me. So yeah, that one was super fun because I love everything dark and gritty.
So, unfortunately, we are running out of time for the interview. We just got hit with the 10-minute timer. We're looking at 8 minutes right now, actually. Um, what are some closing remarks that you want viewers to take from this interview? What would you like to say to those who are watching right now?
Well, first of all, thank you for watching. Thank you for using your precious, precious time to listen to me blab about my life. um, do me a solid and check out my music on any available platform. It's everywhere. And if you have friends who would like my work, tell them about me because that is the best thing you can do to support me. And yeah, that's it. I hope everyone has an awesome day.
Well, with that note, everybody, I've been Kaz Denizon with Crash Productions, and we have been joined by Megan McDuffie. Thank you so much for coming out and allowing me to have the opportunity to collaborate with you. I look forward to hearing from you in the future. And if you guys want to see her come back for another interview, let us know in the comments below.